Welcome to the Red Story. If you like, subscribe. I will understand that everything is not in vain. Upon arriving home on a Friday evening, I had high hopes of enjoying a pleasant evening with my beautiful wife after a grueling week of travel. Our 3 grown children live independently, so it seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to spend some quality time together after 22 years of marriage. As I entered the kitchen from the garage, I noticed the mail on the table. Suddenly, I heard a noise upstairs followed by the sound of footsteps descending the stairs. To my delight, my attractive wife, who is 45 years old, entered the living room wearing a short robe that never failed to ignite my excitement. "Oh, you're early," she exclaimed. "I didn't expect you so soon." It wasn't until an hour later that I glanced at my watch and realized I had indeed arrived early, but not excessively so. Curiosity piqued. I inquired about our plans for the evening. "Where are we going?" I asked. However, her response caught me off guard. "Well, I'm leaving," she stated matter-of-factly. "I don't know what you're doing, okay?" My heart sank as I realized my weekend plans had suddenly been shattered. "What do you mean you're leaving?" I questioned, desperately seeking answers. "And with whom?" Her gaze shifted towards a small bag of belongings placed at the end of the sofa. "I have a date with William Strathmore," she revealed. "This is for the weekend. I'll be back on Sunday night, and then we can discuss it further." I was dumbfounded by her revelation. As I tried to process the situation, I realized I needed support. Without hesitation, I reached for my mobile phone and dialed my daughter's number. "Hello, Daddy." "What's the matter?" she cheerfully answered. Determined not to be the bearer of bad news, I grabbed her mother's purse and emptied its contents onto the coffee table. "I need you to come here immediately," I pleaded. "Your mother has injured her head, and she needs us." Before I could say anything else, my daughter abruptly ended the call. I then contacted my son, instructing him to call his brother and urgently join us. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" he exclaimed, but I swiftly ended the conversation. Feeling a sense of urgency, I dialed my wife's parents and relayed the same message. Their response mirrored my confusion, resulting in a cacophony of raised voices and distress. Upon regaining composure, I noticed Judith's purse had spilled its usual contents: credit cards, keys, and even a surprising stash of 12 packs of condoms. What caught my attention was a vasectomy confirmation email from the Marriott Hotel in Kenilworth, along with the details of rooms 703 to 710. Recalling my encounters with William Strathmore, whom I believed to be one of the pediatric surgeons at Judith's workplace, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Taking charge of the situation, I confiscated the credit cards and car keys, ensuring that Judith wouldn't have immediate access to them. As a precautionary measure, I tucked the email securely into my pocket. With a sense of urgency, I retrieved my mobile phone and unlocked it using our anniversary date as the passcode. Judith was still occupied upstairs, so I seized the opportunity to consult the emergency contact list from her workplace, hoping to find a way to reach this dubious doctor. While his cell phone number proved unnecessary, his home phone number could potentially shed light on the situation. Dialing the number, I anxiously awaited a response. To my surprise, someone answered after just 2 rings. Realizing that I had dialed Mrs. Strathmore's number, I hesitated for a moment. However, I mustered the courage to explain the situation. "Oh dear, I was waiting for your call, but I don't recognize this number." "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Strathmore inquired. Confirming my identity as David Collins, the husband of the head nurse at the hospital where her husband worked, I reminded her of our previous conversations. Mrs. Strathmore acknowledged the familiarity and expressed her anticipation of a call from William. Sensing the urgency, I cautiously revealed my suspicions. "Your husband isn't at home, Missy. I just had an argument with my wife, and she informed me that she would be spending the weekend with him at the Marriott in Kenilworth until Sunday evening." Mrs. Strathmore's confusion was evident as she questioned the validity of my claims. In response, I shared the email confirmation I had saved, which detailed the reservation of 7 adjoining rooms. Upon reviewing the emergency contact list, I came across the phone number of Corinne Adams, the hospital's director of health. I was familiar with her as she was a close friend of my wife. Additionally, I knew her husband, who happened to be a detective surgeon. Without hesitation, I dialed her number, and she promptly answered. "Hello, who is this?" she inquired. "Karen, this is David Collins, Judith's husband," I responded. There was a brief pause before she exclaimed, "No, yes, Dave, what can I do for you?" Her tone clearly conveyed her concern. I proceeded to express my suspicions about an inappropriate relationship between Dr. Strathmore and my wife and my desire for it to be investigated and put to an end. However, Corinne regretfully informed me that she couldn't discuss the matter at that moment and abruptly ended the call. I couldn't help but feel perplexed by her reaction. Shortly after, Judith's cell phone began to ring. With a sense of unease, I answered the call on the 3rd ring. Before I could utter a word, the caller, without any hesitation, started speaking. "Judith, he knows everything. What did you tell him? The tone of their voice indicated frustration. I responded, not everything, Karen, but I have gradually discovered some troubling details. The shrill sigh on the other end of the line provided a clear indication that our conversation was coming to an end. Goodbye, they said, and abruptly hung up. I couldn't help but find the situation rather peculiar. Without delay, I obtained Judith's home phone number and dialed it. After 4 rings, a man answered the call. Look, I don't want to upgrade my cable service, I stated, trying to clarify the situation. Jerry, it seems like you've had a rough day, I continued. Confused, he asked, who is this? I replied, Dave Collins, Judith's husband. Recognizing my name, he confirmed, yes. What's the matter? I explained to him the events that had unfolded and my suspicions. I also mentioned that I believe there may be more individuals involved, not just the 3 of them. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Are you thinking the same thing as me? I asked, seeking confirmation. He responded, I'm not entirely sure what I'm thinking, but one thing is certain. Judith won. The tension in the room escalated as Judith descended the stairs, her dress torn and her appearance disheveled. She was met with accusing gazes from our children and her parents. As the situation unfolded, it became clear that the truth was finally out. In the end, Judith was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. Our marriage was over and the fallout affected everyone involved. The scandal rocked the hospital and several marriages fell apart. While I pursued legal action, Judith sought counseling, but the damage was done. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Life moves on, and I've learned to navigate the aftermath of betrayal. It's not easy, but with the support of my children and the clarity that came with time, I've managed to rebuild my life. As Judith left the house with her suitcase, a heavy silence settled over the room. The children looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. They had witnessed their mother's betrayal, and now they were watching the aftermath unfold. My daughter, sensing the tension, broke the silence. Dad, are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, trying to reassure her. I'll be fine, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure if I believed it myself. The emotional toll of the past few hours was beginning to weigh on me, and I knew I had a long road ahead to rebuild not only my life, but also the trust that had been shattered. My eldest son approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder. We're here for you, Dad, he said firmly. We'll get through this together. His words brought me a sense of relief. I wasn't alone in this. My children, despite their own pain and confusion, were standing by my side. It was a small comfort in the midst of the chaos, but it was enough to keep me going. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of my new life began to set in. I moved forward with the divorce proceedings, though it was a painful and drawn-out process. Judith, now facing the consequences of her actions, tried to make amends in her own way, seeking therapy and expressing remorse, but the damage had been done, and there was no going back. During this time, I leaned heavily on my children and close friends. Their support was invaluable, helping me navigate the emotional turmoil and the practical aspects of rebuilding my life. United Airlines, my employer, also showed understanding, granting me extended leave to deal with the situation. Judith, meanwhile, lost her job at the hospital, along with several others involved in the scandal. The hospital tried to keep the incident under wraps, but the truth eventually came out, leading to a series of legal actions and the downfall of several careers. The legal battle was exhausting, but I was determined to see it through. Along with other victims of the scandal, we pursued justice against those who had wronged us. The hospital faced severe consequences, and we eventually reached a settlement. The financial compensation was significant, but it was the moral victory that meant the most to me. As for my relationship with Judith, it took a long time to come to terms with everything that had happened. Despite her efforts to reconcile, I couldn't forget the betrayal. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was shattered, and no amount of therapy or apologies could repair it. In the end, I decided to move on. I focused on rebuilding my life, finding solace in my children and the small victories that came with each day. Life continued, and though it was not the future I had envisioned, it was one I could accept and work with. Judith, on the other hand, continued to struggle with the consequences of her choices. The scandal had tarnished her reputation, and she faced isolation from friends and colleagues. The support she had once taken for granted was no longer there, and she had to face the reality of her actions alone. One day, months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into her at a grocery store. She looked tired and worn, a shadow of the confident woman I once knew. We exchanged a brief, awkward greeting before going our separate ways. There was no anger left in me, just a deep sense of sadness for what had been lost. As I drove home that day, I reflected on everything that had happened. Betrayal, heartbreak, and the slow process of healing. It hadn't been easy, but I had survived. My children were doing well, and we had forged a new bond through the shared experience of overcoming the pain caused by their mother's actions. Life had a way of moving forward, and I had learned to embrace the changes it brought. The wounds were still there, but they were healing, slowly but surely. And in the end, I realized that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I had faced the storm and come out the other side, ready to live my life on my own terms. As time passed, I began to find a new rhythm in my life. The emptiness that once consumed me gradually gave way to a sense of peace. My children, who had been my pillars of strength, continued to support me, and I threw myself into work and hobbies to fill the void. My relationship with Judith remained distant. We communicated only when necessary, mainly regarding the children. While she tried to reach out and express her remorse, I kept my distance. It wasn't out of bitterness, but rather a recognition that too much had been broken for us to ever return to what we once had. One evening, a few months after our encounter at the grocery store, I received an unexpected phone call from Judith's father. He sounded more somber than I had ever heard him. "David, can we talk?" he asked, his voice heavy with concern. I agreed, and we met the next day at a small cafe. He looked older, his face etched with worry. Over coffee, he told me about Judith's struggles since the divorce. She had been spiraling, unable to cope with the fallout of her actions. Her regret was profound, but it seemed to be eating away at her, leading her down a path of self-destruction. "She needs help, David," he said, his voice cracking. "We don't know what to do anymore. She refuses to listen to us, and we're afraid of where this is headed." I listened quietly, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. It was painful to hear about Judith's suffering, but I also knew that I couldn't save her from the consequences of her choices. Still, I couldn't ignore the plea in her father's eyes. "I'll talk to her," I finally said, though I wasn't sure what I could do. A few days later, I arranged to meet Judith at a park where we used to take our kids when they were little. When she arrived, she looked even more fragile than before. There was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there the last time we spoke. "David," she greeted me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Judith," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Your father is worried about you. He says you've been struggling." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know how to move on," she admitted. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, our marriage. I don't even know who I am anymore." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had been angry for so long, but seeing her like this, all that anger seemed to dissolve, leaving only a deep sense of pity. "You have to find a way to forgive yourself," I finally said. "You make mistakes, but you can't let them define the rest of your life. You still have a chance to rebuild, to make things right with the people you care about." Judith looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair. "Do you really think I can do that?" she asked. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I think it's up to you. But you need to let go of the past if you want to move forward. Start by taking care of yourself. Get the help you need." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I'll try," she whispered. After that conversation, Judith did start to make changes. She sought therapy, reconnected with her parents, and began to focus on rebuilding her life. It wasn't an easy journey for her, but she made progress, little by little. As for me, I continued to move forward. I began dating again, cautiously at first. The idea of trusting someone new was daunting, but I knew I couldn't let my past define my future. Over time, I met someone who brought light back into my life, a woman who understood my pain and helped me heal from it. My children were happy for me, encouraging me to embrace this new chapter. They had seen me at my lowest and were relieved to see me finding joy again. It wasn't long before my relationship with this new woman became something serious, and for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. Judith and I remained cordial, particularly for the sake of our children. While we could never go back to being a couple, we found a way to coexist peacefully. She eventually found a new job, though not in the same field, and started to rebuild her life in earnest. In the end, life had taken us down different paths, but I had come to terms with that. I realized that holding on to bitterness only held me back, and I was ready to let go of the past. It was time to focus on the present and the future, on the happiness I had found and the new life I was building. The pain and betrayal had once consumed me, but now it was just a part of my history, a chapter that had closed. I had emerged from the darkness stronger, more resilient, and with a renewed sense of purpose. And as I looked forward to what lay ahead, I knew that I was finally ready to embrace the possibilities of a new beginning. 4-0, Dwight Skazali. Perdolzhai, ChatGPT Skazel. ChatGPT. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to feel a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The anger, the bitterness, and the heartache that once dominated my life started to fade. In their place, there was a calm acceptance of the past and a quiet hope for the future. My relationship with the new woman in my life, Emma, grew stronger with each passing day. She was patient and kind, understanding the scars I carried and never pushing me beyond what I was ready to give. We spent our time exploring new places, trying new things, and simply enjoying each other's company. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to build something beautiful from the ground up. My children, who had been my source of strength throughout the ordeal, were also finding their own paths. They had each come to terms with the changes in our family, and while their relationship with their mother was strained, they were learning to navigate it with maturity and grace. They had their own lives to live, but they never hesitated to check in on me to make sure I was doing okay. Judith, on the other hand, continued her journey of self-recovery. She was working on herself, trying to piece together the fragments of her life that had been shattered. We spoke occasionally, mostly about the children, and our conversations were civil, even friendly at times. There was a mutual understanding that we had both made mistakes, and while the wounds were still there, we had reached a place where we could coexist without animosity. One evening, as I sat on the porch of the home I now shared with Emma, sipping on a glass of wine, I reflected on the journey I had been on. Life had thrown me some hard punches, but I had managed to stand back up each time. I had learned the importance of self-respect, of not letting someone else's actions dictate my worth. Most importantly, I had discovered that it was possible to heal, to find love again, and to rebuild a life that had been shattered. Emma joined me on the porch, taking a seat beside me. She smiled, her eyes full of warmth and understanding. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, gently placing her hand on mine. I smiled back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her presence in my life. "Just thinking about how far we've come," I replied. "It's been a long road, but I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." She squeezed my hand, her smile widening. "I'm glad you feel that way. I think we've both found something special here." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The future was still uncertain, as it always is, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever it might hold. I had love, I had my children, and I had a new life that I was proud of. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I knew that I had made it through the storm. The pain and betrayal of the past were now just distant memories, overshadowed by the joy and contentment I had found. Life had given me a second chance, and I was determined to make the most of it. Looking over at Emma, I felt a deep sense of peace. The road had been tough, but it had led me to a place of healing and happiness. And for that, I was eternally grateful. Several months had passed, and I had finally settled into my new life. My relationships with Emma and the children gradually became an essential part of my existence. Emma and I bought a cozy, bright house where every corner reminded us of our shared happiness. The children often stayed with us, filling the house with laughter and joy. Despite all the positive changes, the shadows of the past occasionally returned. I tried not to think about Judith and what she had done. But sometimes memories resurfaced like old wounds that occasionally reminded me of themselves. In those moments, I found solace in Emma and our new life. One day, I received a letter from Judith. It was unexpected. In the letter, she apologized for everything that had happened. She acknowledged her mistakes and how much she had hurt me and the children. She wrote that she understood she had destroyed our family and that she now had a lot of work to do on herself. But she wanted me to know that she recognized the weight of her actions. As I read the letter, I felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, I was glad she had finally realized her guilt. On the other hand, I understood that this apology would not bring back the years that had been lost. But I also realized that holding on to resentment was not the path to happiness. I decided to let go of the pain and move on. Emma and I continued to build our life together. We went on trips, explored new places, and enjoyed every moment. The children were happy to see their father finding peace and joy again. We became a real family, though a bit different from what it used to be. Sometime later, I met with Judith again, but this was no longer the same kind of meeting as before. It was a meeting between two people who had recognized their mistakes, endured pain, and found the strength to move on. We talked about the past, about what had happened, and about what each of us had found in our new lives. I felt that I had truly forgiven her, and this became an important step on the path to complete healing. Now I look at my life with gratitude. I have been through a lot, but it has made me stronger. I am grateful for the lessons I have learned and for the opportunity to build a new life with those I love. The past is behind me, and I am ready to move forward, knowing that I have people by my side with whom I can share my happiness.